My blood ran cold. Not from the March wind whipping off Puget Sound, but from a phone call I wasn't even supposed to get. 3 days after I put my grandmother's ring back in my pocket and walked out of that restaurant, Chloe's assistant dialed me by mistake. And in those confused 30 seconds, I learned Chloe had already said no long before I ever got down on one knee. Let me back up. Because to understand why that hit so hard, you need to understand everything leading up to that night. I'm Noah, 31, a high school history teacher and assistant football coach in a suburb outside Seattle. Chloe was 29, a corporate attorney at one of those big firms where they measure your worth by billable hours and how many weekends you sacrifice. We'd been together 3 years, lived together for 18 months in my modest 2-bedroom near the school. Our relationship worked in this weird way, where opposites actually complemented each other. Sunday mornings, she'd spread case files across our kitchen table while I made pancakes. We'd argue about legal precedents versus historical context like it was foreplay. She'd help me grade essays on the American Revolution while I cooked dinner and listened to her vent about impossible partners and client demands. We weren't one of those couples who finished each other's sentences, but we had a rhythm. I thought we had a future. The proposal happened at the steakhouse we'd been going to since our 4th date. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. I had my grandmother's ring in my jacket pocket, the one my mom had been holding onto for years, waiting for me to find the right person. The waiter had just cleared our plates when I reached for the small velvet box, my heart doing that nervous, excited thing where you know you're about to change everything. Then I saw her face change. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't surprise. It was something closer to panic, like I'd just told her the building was on fire. She asked what I was doing. Her voice had this edge I'd never heard before. I was already halfway out of my chair, box in hand, telling her I was asking her to marry me. The restaurant went quiet in that way places do when someone notices a proposal happening. She looked at the ring, then at me, then at the ring again, and tears started forming. But they weren't the right kind of tears. "I can't," she whispered. Loud enough that the couple next to us definitely heard. I sat back down slowly, feeling like I'd just been punched in the stomach by someone who apologized while doing it. I asked her if it was can't or won't. Keeping my voice steady, even though everything inside me was collapsing, she took a shaky breath and laid it all out with the same clinical precision she used in contract negotiations. 80-hour weeks weren't optional. They were expected. Weekend networking events, client dinners, emergency motions filed at midnight. The partners watched everything, judged everything, and marriage meant divided attention. She told me marriage was compromise, and I could see she'd thought about this before, probably even rehearsed it. It meant someone else's schedule, someone else's emergencies, someone else's family obligations. She couldn't afford that right now. Not if she wanted to make partner. I tried every angle I could think of. Sitting there with my grandmother's ring still in my hand like an idiot. * long engagement, no timeline. We could wait until after she made partner. No kids until she was ready. 5 years, 10 years, whatever she needed. She could keep her last name. We didn't have to change anything that mattered to her professionally. She shook her head at each suggestion. And I watched her attorney brain dismantle every compromise like she was marking up a contract with red ink. She called them band-aids. Said I was asking her to choose, so she was choosing her career. The thing that got me wasn't the rejection itself. It was how clearly she'd already made this decision. This wasn't a surprise proposal she needed time to think about. This was her drawing a line between what mattered most and what mattered less. I mattered less. I put the ring box back in my pocket and signaled for the check. I didn't yell, didn't try to change her mind, didn't make a scene that would give the other diners something to talk about for weeks. I thanked her for being honest, for not wasting more of my time. Her eyes went wide, like she'd expected me to fight harder, to beg, to prove my love through persistence. She asked if that was it. Wasn't I going to try to convince her? If I have to convince you to marry me, Chloe, I said, my voice barely a whisper, then you're not the person I should be marrying. I paid the bill, walked her to her car in the parking lot because even heartbroken, I was raised with manners, and watched her sit in the driver's seat without starting the engine. I told her I hoped she made partner, that I really hoped it would be everything she needed it to be. And I meant it. She drove away and I stood there in the parking lot of our steakhouse watching her taillights disappear, understanding something fundamental about love. Sometimes loving someone means accepting that you're not what they need, even when you wish you were. I thought that was the end of our story. Clean break, mutual respect, two people wanting different things from life. But then came that accidental phone call, the one where her assistant, trying to reach someone else, inadvertently let slip something that changed everything. Chloe had been on the phone with the senior partner at her firm the morning of our proposal. Before we even got to the restaurant, she told him she was prepared to make difficult personal sacrifices to prove her commitment to the firm. He'd apparently asked if she had any personal entanglements that might interfere with the upcoming merger case, the one that would determine partnership track. She'd said no. She'd said no before I even asked the question. The proposal wasn't a surprise that threw her off balance. It was an inconvenient confirmation of something she'd already decided to eliminate. I wasn't a person she loved but couldn't prioritize. I was an obstacle she'd already planned to remove. That realization changed everything about how I understood our ending. When someone treats your proposal like a business problem they've already solved, that's not love struggling against circumstances. That's someone who made their choice before you even ask the question. Walking away with dignity sometimes says more about your character than fighting for someone who's already let you go. Chloe threw herself into work like someone running from a crime scene. Within a week of our breakup, she'd taken on the massive merger case her firm had been planning, the one that would make or break her partnership chances. Our mutual friends started feeding me updates without me even asking. The kind of concerned observations people share when they're watching someone self-destruct in slow motion. She was first in the office every morning, last to leave every night. Sometimes sleeping on the couch in the conference room instead of going home. Coffee from the vending machine, takeout sushi at her desk. Her entire life compressed into billable hours and client meetings. One friend told me she'd handled 3 high-profile cases simultaneously, flew to Los Angeles twice a week, and looked like she hadn't slept properly in months. She was proving her dedication to people who measured human worth in spreadsheets. Meanwhile, I was falling apart in a completely different way. I couldn't stay in our apartment. Not with her coffee mug still in the cabinet, and her books on the shelf, and the ghost of her rehearsing legal arguments in the shower every morning. She'd packed her things while I was at school one day. Left her key on the kitchen counter with a note that just said, "Thanks for understanding." The emptiness hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted her back, but because the space we built together suddenly felt like a museum of something dead. I handled it the way I handle most things, by pouring myself into work until there wasn't room left for feelings. I started staying late at school, running extra study sessions for kids who were struggling, volunteering for every committee and event that needed supervision. I coached morning practices and afternoon practices, helped organize the winter formal, and somehow ended up advising the debate team, even though that wasn't technically my job. The school became my refuge. The students became my purpose. And somewhere in all that activity, I forgot to be miserable. One of my players mentioned it in the locker room after practice, not knowing I could hear him. He told his teammate that coach seemed different lately, more intense, but in a good way, like he actually saw them as people instead of just athletes running plays. That comment stuck with me because it was true. Losing Chloe had stripped away some protective layer I didn't know I'd built. It made me more present for everyone else because I had nothing left to save for myself. I couldn't stay in that apartment, though. Not long term. Not with her absence screaming from every corner. I spent 3 weekends repainting the walls in colors she would have hated. Warm earth tones instead of her preferred minimalist gray. I replaced the furniture we'd picked out together with stuff from estate sales and secondhand stores. Things that had history, but not our history. I hung photos of my family, my team, trips I'd taken before we met, turning the space into something that belonged only to me. Our mutual friends drifted away naturally, not because of drama, but because staying neutral meant choosing distance. I didn't fight it, didn't try to maintain connections that required explaining or choosing sides. Sometimes healing means letting go of everything connected to the wound, even the good parts. About 9 months after the breakup, I heard through the grapevine that Chloe made Jr. partner. Youngest in her firm's history, exactly like she'd planned. Someone told me she celebrated alone in her downtown high-rise apartment with expensive wine and takeout from that place she loved. No one to share it with, because everyone who mattered was still at the office. She'd achieved her goal, and the hollowness of that victory wasn't lost on anyone watching. Her dating life became this pattern people noticed but nobody mentioned directly. She went out with another attorney from a rival firm, someone equally successful and driven, and their relationship apparently operated like a business merger. Scheduled dinners when calendars aligned, conversations about case strategy instead of emotions, intimacy planned around court deadlines. It lasted 4 months before dying of neglect. Then a surgeon who worked the same brutal hours she did. And according to mutual friends, they managed maybe 3 actual dates in 6 months because someone always had an emergency. Their relationship was a series of rain checks and apologetic text messages. I heard through the network that she'd started noticing something at firm events. Partners who brought their spouses and kids weren't the ones struggling. They were thriving. They left at reasonable hours for soccer games and recitals, came back refreshed, closed deals with clear heads. The ones working 100-hour weeks looked exhausted and made sloppy mistakes. Having something worth going home to didn't destroy ambition, it focused it. That realization seemed to shake something in her carefully constructed belief system. I met Sarah at a school literacy program almost 2 years after everything fell apart. She was a children's librarian volunteering her time to help struggling readers, and I was there supervising students who needed community service hours. She had this way of talking to kids that made them feel capable instead of broken, turning reading challenges into adventures instead of failures. I watched her spend 40 minutes with a 3rd grader who couldn't get through a picture book, celebrating every successful word like it was a miracle. And something in my chest unclenched for the first time in months. We started talking during breaks, casual conversation that turned into coffee, that turned into actual dates where we did normal things like mini golf and farmers markets and used bookstores. She came to my football games without being asked and learned all my players' names within 3 weeks. She had dinner with my family and fit into the chaos like she'd always been there, helping my mom in the kitchen and debating book recommendations with my dad. My mom pulled me aside after that second dinner and said Sarah wasn't trying to impress anyone or change anything. She just found her place naturally, like puzzle pieces that actually fit. Sarah was everything Chloe wasn't. Not better or worse, but different in ways that mattered to me. She built things while Chloe conquered them. She supported without competing. She saw partnership as collaboration instead of compromise. Loving her felt easy in a way I didn't know relationships could be. 10 months after we started dating, I proposed at a lighthouse on the Olympic Peninsula. The opposite of that steakhouse disaster in every possible way. No fancy restaurant, no pressure, no audience, just us in the ocean and a ring I'd picked up myself instead of inheriting. Yes, she said before I even finished the question, laughing and crying at the same time. And I realized this is what it's supposed to feel like when 2 people want the same future. We got married 5 months later in a small ceremony with family and close friends, and half my football team serving as unofficial ushers because they'd insisted on being involved. It was chaotic and perfect, and nothing like the wedding I'd once imagined with Chloe, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. I thought our paths had separated permanently, that Chloe was living her successful life while I built mine. 2 parallel tracks that would never intersect again. Then something happened that cracked her world open and brought us face to face in the most uncomfortable way possible. Chloe's paralegal, scrolling through a local news website during lunch, found one of those community interest pieces about local educators tying the knot. She showed it to Chloe casually, not knowing the history, just making conversation about people getting married young. The photo showed me and Sarah on the courthouse steps right after we'd filed for our marriage license. Both of us grinning like idiots, her hand on my chest, my arm around her waist. The kind of candid joy you can't manufacture. The article mentioned how we met through the school literacy program, our shared love of historical fiction, how I proposed at a lighthouse because Sarah loved the ocean, normal life stuff, the kind of specific details that make a relationship real instead of theoretical. Chloe excused herself to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall for 20 minutes, trying to breathe normally. The reaction confused her, because it wasn't jealousy exactly, more like vertigo, seeing concrete proof that I'd built everything she'd walked away from while she'd been billing hours and winning cases and climbing ladders. The happiness in that photo showed her the exact shape of what she'd traded away, and the exchange suddenly looked catastrophically unequal. She started noticing things at work she'd trained herself to ignore. Client meetings about divorce settlements where successful people explained how they'd let their marriages die through neglect and ambition. Prenuptial agreements for couples already hedging their bets before saying vows. Hours spent mediating disputes between people who used to love each other, listening to them describe how work and individual goals had eroded partnership into resentment and scorekeeping. The irony wasn't subtle, she was legally dismantling relationships while understanding she'd dismantled her own for identical reasons. One case in particular destroyed something in her. A senior partner at another firm whose wife was leaving after 30 years sat in Chloe's office and said his wife used to be his teammate in everything. That they built their success together until he started treating her like staff instead of a partner. He'd chosen the firm over her repeatedly for 3 decades, assumed she'd always be there waiting, and now she wasn't. Chloe billed him $400 an hour to document his regrets in legal language. The pro bono case landed on her desk 2 months after she saw my wedding announcement. An education funding lawsuit needed someone willing to donate serious hours fighting budget cuts affecting public schools. She volunteered because it looked excellent for her partnership review and because she genuinely cared about education access, even if she'd never admit the second part out loud. The case required consultation with school administrators across 3 districts to document the financial impact of proposed cuts. She was reviewing the contact list her assistant prepared when she saw my name listed as assistant principal and athletic director. Her hands actually shook holding that paper. Seeing my title, my office extension, my professional email address in bullet points, she convinced herself it was just work, that she could handle a professional meeting with an ex-boyfriend. That 3.5 years of distance made us strangers who used to know each other. The meeting was scheduled at the district administration building, one of those aggressively ugly government structures from the 70s with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick and motivational posters about education changing lives. She arrived early, overprepared like always, carrying her litigation bag and laptop and enough documentation to bury a small country. The receptionist directed her to conference room B, where I was already set up with budget reports and student impact assessments spread across the table. I looked different, not physically, but energetically, more settled into myself, comfortable in a way I'd never been when we were together. I was reviewing recommendation letters I'd written for college-bound students when Sarah walked in carrying 2 coffees, visibly pregnant, wearing a dress that showed she was maybe 6 months along. She called me honey and asked if I was ready for lunch, and I lit up in a way that made Chloe's chest physically ache. I stood immediately, took the coffee, guided Sarah to a chair with my hand on the small of her back. That unconscious, protective gesture people make when they love someone. The care in that simple movement said everything about who we'd become to each other. I introduced them professionally, keeping it neutral. Noah and Chloe used to date. Chloe is handling the pro bono education case. This is my wife, Sarah. She works at the children's library downtown. Sarah smiled with genuine warmth. No jealousy or territorial energy, just friendly appreciation for someone helping defend school funding. She thanked Chloe for taking the case, said it mattered enormously for the kids, that budget cuts would devastate programs my students desperately needed. Her sincerity was almost uncomfortable in its authenticity, like she actually meant every word instead of performing politeness. The meeting lasted 47 minutes of purely professional discussion about financial projections and program eliminations and student-to-teacher ratios. I walked Chloe through the data methodically, explained which cuts would hurt most, provided documentation she could use in court. Between budget line items, I mentioned casually that I was finishing my dissertation on educational policy history, that I'd been working on it for 3 years while teaching full-time and coaching. Sarah helped by editing my drafts and managing our daughter so I could write on weekends. Our daughter, Lily, who just turned 2 and was obsessed with dinosaurs and refused to wear anything except her purple boots. Chloe asked about the pregnancy because social convention demanded it. And I told her we were hoping for another girl, but honestly just wanted healthy, that Lily was already planning to be the best big sister in history. I don't know how I got this lucky, I said, showing her a photo on my phone of Lily covered in finger paint at daycare. Pure, chaotic toddler joy frozen in pixels. That comment landed like a physical blow. Not because I meant it cruelly, but because the happiness was so completely genuine. I'd found everything Chloe had convinced herself didn't exist. The partnership that enhanced instead of competed, the family that supported instead of drained, the life that felt full instead of empty. She drove back to her apartment in downtown Seattle afterward, took the elevator to the 32nd floor, walked into her spotless high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The view cost a fortune and impressed clients and business contacts, and meant absolutely nothing to her in that moment. She sat on her designer couch in her designer apartment with her designer life and felt the crushing weight of every choice that had led her there. Some victories look flawless from the outside while feeling catastrophically hollow from within. She'd built a life that photographed beautifully and impressed colleagues, but echoed with absence. Achieved goals that came with plaques and salary increases in corner offices, but nobody to share them with. The partnerships she'd sacrificed us for turned out to be lonelier than she'd ever imagined. And some opportunities for happiness don't wait around for perfect timing or optimal career positioning. I didn't plan any of this as revenge. Didn't architect some elaborate comeuppance. Didn't even know Chloe would be involved in the education case until she walked into that conference room. I just moved toward people who moved toward me. Built a life with someone who wanted to build it with me. Chose partnership with someone who actually chose me back. Sometimes the best response to rejection isn't winning some imaginary competition or proving your worth to someone who couldn't see it. It's just living well with people who genuinely value what you offer. Chloe got her career and learned too late what it actually cost. I got my life and discovered what I'd been saved from. That's not karma or justice or revenge. That's just what happens when people make fundamentally different choices about what matters most and then have to live inside those choices for the rest of their lives. The real lesson here isn't about winning or losing after a breakup. It's about understanding that you can achieve everything you thought you wanted and still end up with nothing that actually matters. Chloe made partner just like she planned, but nobody was there to celebrate with her because she'd optimized her life for achievement instead of connection. Meanwhile, the right partner doesn't just coexist with your ambitions, they amplify them while making everything else better, too. So, here's my question for you. Would you have walked away like I did when she said her career came first, or would you have kept trying to convince her?